Mr. President, I speak not only as a Briton, as a Londoner, and as a Foreign Secretary, but I say to the Russian representative on his phone as I speak that I stand here also as a black man whose ancestors were taken in chains from Africa at the barrel of a gun to be enslaved, whose ancestors rose up and fought in a great rebellion of the enslaved. Imperialism, I know it when I see it, and I will call it out for what it is. So let me be clear, we want peace in Ukraine. We want it for the Ukrainian people. As President Zelensky has said, it must be a peace that respects the fundamental principles that underpin the United Nations, the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, as enshrined in this UN Charter, the Charter of the United Nations. Putin's Russia wants to unravel it. We want to uphold it, and we will. As President Zelensky said, the UN Charter will prevail. Slava Ukraini.
When some propose alternatives, half-hearted settlement plans, so-called sets of principles, it not only ignores the interests and suffering of Ukrainians, who are affected by the war the most. It not only ignores reality, but also gives Putin the political space to continue the war and pressure the world to bring more nations under control. Any parallel or alternative attempts to seek peace are, in fact, efforts to achieve a lull instead of an end to the war. And when the Chinese-Brazilian duo tries to grow into a choir of voices, with someone in Europe, with someone in Africa saying something alternative to a full and just peace, the question arises, what is the true interest? Everyone must understand you will not boost your power at Ukraine's expense. And the world has already been through colonial wars and conspiracies of great powers at the expense of those who are smaller. Every country, including China, Brazil, European nations, African nations, Middle East, all understand why this must remain in the past. And Ukrainians will never accept why anyone in the world believes that such a brutal colonial past, which suits no one today, can be imposed on Ukraine now instead of a normal, peaceful life. Recently, I received yet another alarming report from our intelligence. Now Putin does seem to be planning attacks on our nuclear power plants and their infrastructure, aiming to disconnect the plants from the power grid. With the help of satellites, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, satellites of other countries. Russia is getting images and detailed information about the infrastructure of our nuclear power plants. But what does this really threaten? Any missile or drone strike, any critical incident in the energy system could lead to a nuclear disaster. A day like that must never come. And I'm asking for your support from all nations of the world. We do not divide the world. I ask the same of you, do not divide the world. Be united nations. And that will bring us peace. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
The vast majority of humanitarian need in the world today is driven by conflict. After 20 years of gains in tackling poverty, disease, and in health, war is one of the main regions that progress has stalled. That is a catastrophe made by human hands. It has weakened the cause of cooperation, sowed political division between North and South, and turned the geopolitical dial away from the rule of law towards brute force and aggression. And this matters to us all. My message today is this: we are returning the UK to responsible global leadership. Because I think the international system can be better. We need it to be better. People talk about an age of polarization, impunity, instability, an unraveling of the UN Charter. And I fear that a sense of fatalism has taken hold. But our task is to say, no, we won't accept this slide into greater and greater conflict, instability, and injustice. So we are ready to step up in a spirit of respect and equal partnership. I don't claim that solving these problems is easy, but there are positive, practical things that we can do together. This starts with addressing the rising tide of conflict and preventing a regional war in the Middle East. I call on Israel and Hezbollah, stop the violence, step back from the brink. We need to see an immediate ceasefire to provide space for a diplomatic settlement. And we are working with all partners to that end, because further escalation serves no one. It offers nothing but more suffering for innocent people on all sides. It is intimately linked with the situation in Gaza, where again we need to see an immediate ceasefire. It shames us all that the suffering in Gaza continues to grow. The answer is diplomacy, the release of all the hostages and the unfettered flow of aid to those in need. That is the only way to break this devastating cycle of violence and begin the journey towards a political solution for the long term, which delivers the long-promised Palestinian state alongside a safe and secure Israel. We must also work together for peace in Sudan and a proper response to the worst humanitarian crisis in the world today. We need to see greater action to deliver aid and to deliver peace. And we must stand up for international law. And that's why we are so resolute in our support for Ukraine. They are exercising their right to self-defense as provided for under the UN Charter and recognized by 141 members of this Assembly. We will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes, because the alternative would be to confirm the worst claims about this place, that international law is merely a paper tiger, and that aggressors can do what they will. Reducing conflict is not the limit of our responsibility. Other global challenges impact us too. So we must work to get the SDGs back on track. So, Mr. President, under my leadership, the UK will lead again, tackling climate change at home and internationally, and restoring our commitment to international development by tackling conflict, making progress in the fight against climate change and poverty, and reforming the international system so that it's fit for the 21st century. We can realize the hope and the promise that shine through the founding documents of this organization. Together, in all our interests, we can change direction from the dangerous, destructive path we find ourselves on and turn instead towards the rule of law, towards cooperation, responsibility, and progress, towards peace.
First and foremost, please allow me, on behalf of the government of Japan, to pay tribute to and express solidarity with President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people, who have been fighting to uphold the inalienable principles of the UN Charter for the political independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of their country since the start of the aggression.
Putin has broken so many international norms and rules that he won't stop on his own. Russia can only be forced into peace. And that is exactly what's needed, forcing Russia into peace as the sole aggressor in this war, the sole violator of the UN Charter. One day in this hall, it will surely be said that Russia's war against Ukraine has ended, not frozen, not paused, not forgotten, truly ended. And this will happen not because someone got tired of the war, not because someone traded something with Putin. Russia's war against Ukraine will end because the UN Charter will work. It must work. Our Ukrainian right to self-defense must prevail. Our cooperation with nations of the world who value life as we do, our territorial integrity, our sovereignty, the independence of our country. Russia has no legitimate reason, none at all, for making Iran and North Korea de facto accomplices in its criminal war in Europe, with their weapons, killing us, killing Ukrainians, and helping Putin steal our land from our people. This war can't be calmed by talks. Action is needed.
Support from Tehran and Pyongyang is helping Putin inflict carnage, suffering, and ruin on innocent Ukrainian men, women, and children. Demolish Ukrainian apartment buildings, grain silos, and ports. Ravage Ukrainian power plants, heating, and natural gas facilities, just as freezing temperatures are setting in. These actions by Iran, North Korea, and Russia have violated multiple Security Council resolutions, resolutions that Russia voted for and, as a permanent member, has a special responsibility to enforce. A just and lasting peace must preserve Ukraine's right to choose its own path, its own allies, its own future. A just and lasting peace requires Ukraine's full participation and assent. A just and lasting peace must support Ukraine's reconstruction and recovery, with Russia paying to fix the damage it's caused. A just and lasting peace must address both accountability and reconciliation. The United States is ready and willing to work with any party dedicated to supporting peace based on these principles. Ukraine has said multiple times that diplomacy is the only way to end this war, and that it's prepared to engage in negotiations. Putin, on the other hand, has no interest in such a peace, recently declaring that Russia would return to the negotiating table only when Ukraine withdraws its troops from Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporizhia. In other words, when Ukraine withdraws from its own territory. Putin continues to claim falsely that Ukraine is not a real state. He continues to deny that the Ukrainian people have their own identity. In Putin's eyes, the Ukrainian people, like Ukraine itself, do not exist. Other countries have put forward their own proposals, some of which make no mention of the UN Charter or its principles, fail to distinguish between the aggressor and the aggressed, and call on all sides to de-escalate. A proposal along these lines would reward Putin's aggression, allow him to rest, rearm, re-invade Ukraine, as he has done time and again. It would also embolden would-be aggressors everywhere around the world. As history teaches us, peace without principle is prologue to more conflict, to more suffering, to more instability. So, to all nations who want this conflict to end, and do it in a way that will endure, the quickest way forward is simple. Stop those who are enabling and fueling Putin's aggression, and demand a just peace that upholds the principles of the United Nations Charter.
I strongly condemn all attacks on civilians and civilian facilities wherever they occur and whoever is responsible. They all must stop immediately. And I remain deeply concerned about the safety, humanitarian needs, and basic human rights of people residing in occupied areas.
And the big leaders speak vigorously and ardently here about the need for Ukrainian freedom, about the observance of the UN and its Charter resolutions. I ask myself, why don't they observe the UN Charter and Resolution 1244 when it comes to the territorial integrity of Serbia? Those who committed the aggression against Serbia, who tried to separate a part of its territory, still try, convincing us that it is the only democratic and reasonable solution to secede Kosovo and Metohija from Serbia, and they have been providing arms on a daily basis to that what is today called the so-called Kosovo security forces. and what will already tomorrow become armed forces of Albanians in the territory of Serbia. And what is their message to us, my dear friends? Their message is, we are the power, we are God, we don't care about United Nations, the law of the United Nations and UN resolution. We can do whatever we want, the way we want, and as long as we want. And now I'm asking you, dear friends, dear representatives, not the ones of obedient and satellite puppet countries, but you freedom-loving nations and countries, what we as a small country can do. How can we fight? Everybody in the world speaks about Ukraine, no one dares to speak about Serbia. And even if they do, they say how we will start the war in the Balkans upon the Russian order. And they have been lying all the time for more than 2.5 years. We are neither servants of Russia nor the United States of America. We have our own politics and our own interests. As the president of Serbia, I believe in a world based on real and not false values. And I believe that the strength of the developing countries, all of us who have raised our heads and who dare to say the truth, will be a foundation of a new, different, and a better world. I thank you very much.
Today, even though we face yet another distressing crisis in the Middle East, as well as rising tensions in the Indo-Pacific region, the Russian war of aggression is the most dangerous threat. The entire international order, defined by sovereignty, territorial integrity, and inviolability of borders, is under assault in Ukraine. What Russia presents to the world is a return to the era of imperial conquest, colonial domination, and genocide. And I do not believe we are ready to follow this path. I do not believe any of us want to see powerful neighbors convincing themselves that from now on every dispute should be settled by force. Therefore, right now, Ukraine is fighting not only a war of self-defense. Ukraine is also fighting for the future of all those countries who believe in the United Nations Charter and its principles. Ukraine is fighting for us all. And yet, our joint collective response to this day is insufficient. We have not been able to stop this madness. We have not been able to force Russia to reconsider its dangerous course. We have not been able to hold it accountable for so many violations of the United Nations Charter. Why was that the case? Because to this day, the aggressor is hiding under the cover of the Security Council's permanent membership, hiding in plain sight, mocking every one of us with its unrestricted veto power. It is a terrible blow to the very credibility of the United Nations system. Lithuania calls on other parties, including Belarus, Iran, North Korea, and China, to stop providing Russia with military support, including the transfer of dual-use materials. More arms for Russia means more civilian deaths, more civilian infrastructure destroyed, more chaos. Lithuania's position remains steadfast. We will not recognize Russia's illegal annexation of any Ukrainian region, be it Crimea, Sevastopol, Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, or Zaporizhia. We will not stop demanding that Russia ends grave violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the occupied territories of Ukraine. Lithuania will continue providing shelter to Ukrainian war refugees. Lithuania will continue supporting Ukraine with all possible means.